At 33, Thomas Jefferson was the youngest of the Virginia delegates. He had not attended the first Congress, when Washington and Patrick Henry had been part of the delegation, and the Virginians, with their liveried servants and splendid horses, had ridden into the city like princelings. His role in the second Congress had been on the whole modest. If he was conspicuous, it was mainly because of his height. At 6 feet 2½ inches, he stood taller than all but a few and towered over someone like John Hancock, who at 5 feet 4 was perhaps the shortest man in the assembly. Standing beside John Adams, Jefferson looked like a lanky, freckled youth. With 8 years' difference in their ages, Adams was Jefferson's senior both in years and political experience. The differences in physique, background, manner, and temperament could hardly have been more contrasting. Where Adams was stout, Jefferson was lean and long-limbed, almost bony. Where Adams stood 4 square to the world, shoulders back, Jefferson customarily stood with his arms folded tightly across his chest. When taking his seat, it was as if he folded into a chair, all knees and elbows and abnormally large hands and feet. Where Adams was nearly bald, Jefferson had a full head of thick, coppery hair. His freckled face was lean like his body, the eyes hazel, the mouth a thin line, the chin sharp. Jefferson was a superb horseman, beautiful to see. He sang. He played the violin. He was as accomplished in the classics as Adams, but also in mathematics, horticulture, architecture, and in his interest in and knowledge of science, he far exceeded Adams. Jefferson dabbled in improvements in agriculture and mechanical devices. His was the more inventive mind. He adored designing and redesigning things of all kinds. Jefferson, who may never have actually put his own hand to a plow, as Adams had, would devise an improved plow based on mathematical principles, a mold board of least resistance, and find equal satisfaction in arriving at the perfect shape for a stone column or silver goblet. Jefferson was devoted to the ideal of improving mankind, but had comparatively little interest in people in particular. Adams was not inclined to believe mankind improvable, but was certain it was important that human nature be understood. In contrast to Adams's need to fill pages of his diaries with his innermost thoughts and feelings, Jefferson kept neat account books. In an invariably precise hand, he recorded every purchase, every payment for meals, wines, books, violin strings, the least item of clothing. Unlike Adams, who, except for books, indulged himself in no expenditures beyond what were necessary, Jefferson was continually in and out of Philadelphia shops, buying whatever struck his fancy. In the spirit of science, Jefferson maintained letter-perfect records of weights, measurements, and daily temperature readings. Adams is not known even to have owned a thermometer. Nothing was too small for him to keep account of, one of his plantation overseers would remember of Jefferson. Yet he kept no personal diary, and for all the hours given to what he called pen and ink work, Jefferson rarely ever revealed his inner feelings in what he wrote. He had nothing like Adams's fascination with human nature, and, quite unlike Adams, little sense of humor. He is a man of science, a close observer would later write of Jefferson, but he knows little of the nature of man, very little indeed. It was Jefferson's graciousness that was so appealing. He was never blunt or assertive, as Adams could be, but subtle, serene by all appearances, always polite, soft-spoken, and diplomatic, if somewhat remote. With Adams there was seldom a doubt about what he meant by what he said. With Jefferson, there was nearly always a slight air of ambiguity. In private conversation, Jefferson sparkled. But in Congress, like Franklin, he scarcely said a word, and if he did, it was in a voice so weak as to be almost inaudible. Rarely would he object to a point or disagree with anyone to his face. Never contradict anybody, he was advised by Franklin, whom he admired above all men, though it was advice he hardly needed. He abhorred dispute, as he said, shrank from the contentiousness of politics, and instinctively avoided confrontation of any kind. It was as if he were trying to proceed through life as he had designed his moldboard plow to go through the red clay of Virginia, with the least resistance possible. Years later, still puzzling over Jefferson's passivity at Philadelphia, Adams would claim that, "During the whole time I sat with him in Congress, I never heard him utter 3 sentences together." Jefferson himself would one day advise a grandson, "When I hear another express an opinion which is not mine, I say to myself, he has a right to his opinion as I to mine. Why should I question it? His error does me no injury, and shall I become a Don Quixote to bring all men by force of argument to one opinion? Be a listener only. Keep within yourself, and endeavor to establish with yourself the habit of silence, especially in politics." Jefferson wished to avoid the rough and tumble of life whenever possible. John Adams's irrepressible desire was to seize hold of it, and at times his was to be the path of Don Quixote.